While most historical murder mysteries were solved not long after the crime was committed, sometimes it's left up to modern science and historians to determine how and why a person died. In this series, we'll look at some of the great unsolved deaths of the past, bringing to life the many theories surrounding them and piecing together the evidence. Hundreds of years may have passed since these events took place, but with the help of forensics, criminologists and specialist experts, we'll attempt to solve these medieval murder mysteries.
According to the official line, he died in a drunken brawl.
A perfectly acceptable story is that they were smothered.
And so died King Edward II.
Murder.
And legend has it that Prince Arthur died of the shock of castration.
It's a possibility, but on the other hand, it's a most unreliable way of killing somebody.
England, 1593. In a house just outside of London, Christopher Marlowe, England's most celebrated poet and playwright, came to an abrupt and violent end. From the London playhouses to the Elizabethan Secret Service, Marlowe's intriguing and mysterious life has led many to question the official events on that fateful day.
There are a lot of inconsistencies in the inquest document.
And so something much more sinister, it's thought, was taking place.
Some say he died in a brawl.
Judging by what we know about Marlowe's character, that he was someone who could easily get involved in quarrels and a brawl, it seems to me perfectly possible that that's what happened on that occasion.
Do not push me!
We cannot detract the presence of alcohol. I wouldn't be surprised if you've got people sitting in a bar arguing over a bill that because of the alcohol that they then become aggressive and then that leads to murder.
Others that he was assassinated.
The real story of Marlowe's death was altogether more dark. It may have been not just murder, but assassination.
He dies of, quote, a single stab wound above the eye. If by this they mean that he's been stabbed in the forehead, I'm afraid that doesn't work. If you stab somebody like that, the knife's going to skate off, it's going to continue under the scalp but not penetrate, or just slide out and give you a slash wound.
And there are those who believe that he faked his own death.
No one has managed to come up with a really good theory for who would want to kill him and why it needed to be quite so elaborate. At the moment, I think the escape hypothesis is actually the strongest one.
So what did happen to Christopher Marlowe? Canterbury, the birthplace of Christopher Marlowe, has a long theatrical tradition. As a young boy, Marlowe would have seen the local actors performing religious plays around the streets and courtyards of the town. Marlowe was born 6 years into the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, in a period known as the English Renaissance, where art, literature and the theatre were all experiencing a great revival. Philippe Lecamp is a local historian and resident of Canterbury.
Now, this is one of the last physical links there is with Christopher Marlowe. This is called St George's Tower and is all that's left of a Norman church called St George's, where he was actually baptised. And we don't know when he was born because there's no records, but we know it must have been only a few days before the 24th of February, because in those days, people baptised their children very quickly because they might not survive.
As a poet, playwright and creator of English blank verse, Christopher Marlowe was at the forefront of the Elizabethan dramatic Renaissance, an impressive rise for someone who came from relatively modest origins.
He was the son of a shoemaker, so he came from very humble beginnings. Clearly, from an early age, he was recognised as a scholar. He had a great aptitude for learning and won a scholarship to the King's School when he was 14.
Marlowe became a King's Scholar, one of 50 boys considered too poor to pay for their education, but endowed with great minds. While at the King's School, he studied Latin, religion, and learned about the arts.
And he did so well there that he was awarded a scholarship to Corpus Christi College in Cambridge at an early age of 16.
Although he was best known for being a poet and playwright, there was another less public side to his life, the murky world of Elizabethan espionage.
Christopher Marlowe was a great poet and a great playwright. He was also a translator of Latin into English, and he may have been a government spy.
When he was up at university, there are some myths about what he did and about some absences that he had from the college. In those days, you signified your presence in the college by your equivalent of the mess bill. In other words, the food you bought from the larder. And there are several absences over his 6.5 years at the college where there was no food purchased at all, which means he wasn't there. And some of these absences were 6 or 7 months. And this is something that fed the myth, or perhaps not a myth, that he was serving his queen. Sir Francis Walsingham was the spy master, Marlowe was one of his boys, and that he was disappearing off into the Low Countries to foment, possibly, insurrection over there.
As head of England's Secret Service, Sir Francis Walsingham was a key figure in the English government, in charge of ensuring the safety of his queen and country.
Immediately after leaving Cambridge, he was in London, and we know that he had his first big hit that year with the play called Tamburlaine. It was extraordinarily successful, and he then followed it with other successful plays, Dr. Faustus, Edward II, The Jew of Malta. All of this time, we don't know what he was doing in terms of spying, because if he was going to be a successful intelligence agent, clearly it needed to be secretive. But in January of 1592, he was arrested in the Netherlands in what looks like some fairly dodgy business. He was arrested for counterfeiting coins, which was a potentially treasonous offence. But when he was sent back to Lord Burleigh, who was very probably his boss, of course, he wasn't put into prison. Nothing happened to him. So we think he was actually on government business, and he was trying to infiltrate a plot against the Queen's life.
Lord Burleigh was chief advisor to Queen Elizabeth I and one of the most powerful men in England. Along with Sir Francis Walsingham, he ran England's large network of spies throughout Europe.
Marlowe himself was a little bit of a feisty individual, and he had 2 or 3 occasions when he would have been hung up in the courts for what we would call today common assault.
He was obviously a man who was pretty much a genius, I think. I mean, judging by the blank verse that he wrote in his plays and the characterization and plotting of the plays. He was also something, I think, of a brawler. What we do know about him shows him in unsavory company, and it also shows that he was guilty of a couple of breaches of the peace. It's said that he was an atheist, but some of the evidence for that has been challenged. It's also said that he was a homosexual, but that's based on a misunderstanding of homosexuality and homoeroticism of the 16th century, so we can't be certain of that either.
Marlowe lived in an age when England was experiencing rising tensions between Protestants and Catholics, and it wasn't long before he got caught up in the religious conflict of the times.
Things started to go wrong for Marlowe in the beginning of May 1593. Somebody posted a poem up on the wall of a Dutch church in London, It was a poem in blank verse, which was Marlowe's recognised style. It mentioned 3 of his plays. It was signed Tamburlaine, was the name of his most famous protagonist. And it was advocating violence against immigrants.
During the Elizabethan period, Protestant refugees from across Europe were routinely subjected to persecution and threats, often in the form of written pamphlets called libels. Thomas Kidd, a friend of Marlowe's and fellow poet and playwright, was arrested on suspicion of being involved in writing the libel.
His papers were seized, and in those papers were something that was referred to as vile heretical conceits, which Thomas Kidd said were Marlowe's papers, not his. Subsequently, there was a warrant issued for Marlowe's arrest, and he appeared before the Privy Council. 10 days later, rather conveniently, Marlowe was dead.
The official account of Marlowe's death states that he died from a single stab wound, which his killer claimed to have inflicted in self-defense.
The official report on Marlowe's death said that he was killed in a drunken brawl in a pub in Deptford.
The coroner's reports say that he went to a house in Deptford at 10 o'clock in the morning, and there he met some friends, and all was well until after supper. They discussed the bill, or the reckoning as it was called, and that there was a quarrel over the amount, and that he grabbed hold of a dagger, and in self-defense, one of his companions, a man called Frazier, killed him.
The inquest document is very specific about what happened. Ingram Fraser was sitting between Robert Poley and Nicholas Skeers. It says that Marlowe grabbed Fraser's knife, which was at his back. Ingram Fraser somehow turned the top of his body, wrestled with Marlowe, tried to wrestle his knife back, and in the process of doing so, stabbed Marlowe just above his right eye to a depth of 2 inches and 1 inch wide. And it says that Marlowe died instantly from the wound he received.
On the surface, it seems to be a plausible story. But after reviewing the evidence, what would a modern-day barrister, pathologist, and criminal psychologist make of Marlowe's death? From royal tribunals to international murder cases, barrister Andrew Rose has both defended and prosecuted at numerous criminal trials over his career.
Looking at the evidence as it stands, it would seem perfectly possible that Marlowe was killed in the course of a brawl.
Would you mind? Has ever been seen on a London stage?
We don't know how much each individual had to drink, but they all seem to be rather strong characters, and these were rumbustious times. So it doesn't seem to be wholly implausible that there wasn't a defence of self-defence available to Fraser, which was accepted by the jury of the day.
But could something as small as a disagreement over the bill really escalate into a killing?
There are 2 reasons why going out for a drink and a simple thing in terms of paying a bill might escalate into violence and murder. We cannot detract the presence of alcohol. We know that alcohol lowers inhibitions, can, in some people, increase aggression, and so therefore even the smallest thing, for example, bumping into somebody and spilling their pint, can result in a fight, in aggression. And so therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if you've got people sitting in a bar arguing over a bill that because of the alcohol, that they then become aggressive, and then that leads to murder.
During the inquest, Ingram Fraser entered a plea of self-defence, should we simply accept his account that Marlowe's death was not premeditated?
Is the murder intentional? That's another question. It might be an accidental murder because of the aggression, because of the fight. If it's intentional, then we need to look at something else that's going on, that it's not necessarily just the alcohol.
One of the biggest obstacles in finding out what really happened is the lack of impartial witnesses.
The first task is to assess exactly what happened, which is probably very difficult to do. The amount of material available is going to be limited. A lot of it seems to derive from the coroner's report, and coroners in those days were appointed by the Crown. They were answerable to the Crown, and they would be likely to behave in a way which would not cause any problems with the Crown.
Since the killing was deemed to have taken place within a 12-mile vicinity of the monarch, the inquest was conducted by William Danby, the Queen's coroner. But in the Elizabethan period, Deptford was part of the English county of Kent, and by law, a Kent county coroner should have been present. Danby, however, conducted the inquest on his own.
We know that the parties involved had some kind of links with government, and I don't think we'd be 100% sure that he fulfilled his duty completely as a coroner perhaps should do. The coroner's task is to investigate the cause of death, the how and the where and the why of the death, and of course to establish the identity of the deceased. In this case, there was no doubt it was Christopher Marlowe. As to the other factors, of course, what was going through the coroner's mind in the way in which he was handling the case may well have affected the way in which questions were put. So to that extent, we have to study any documentation, I think, with great care.
Professor Mike Green is a former Home Office pathologist. His years of experience have seen him carry out countless examinations at crime scenes to determine the exact cause of death.
Christopher Marlowe, according to the contemporary accounts, dies in a brawl in Deptford. He dies of, quote, a single stab wound above the eye. If by this they mean that he's been stabbed in the forehead, I'm afraid that doesn't work, because as you can see, the skull's a pretty solid object, and if you stab somebody like that, the knife's going to skate off, it's going to continue under the scalp but not penetrate, or just slide out and give you a slash. In the course of my career, which spanned 40 years, I only saw 2 cases where a stab wound actually got through the skull, and they both got through the skull round the side here, the temporal region where the bone is very thin. But if we look at an alternative scenario and assume that the description wasn't entirely accurate, and he's been stabbed above the right eye but into the orbit, we've got a different story. The knife goes over the top of the eyeball. As you might be able to see when I held the skull up, the skull of the roof of the orbit is so thin that it lets light through it. It's just a single layer of bone as opposed to a 3-layer sandwich of bone like the rest of the skull is. And if the knife goes through that way, above the eyeball, and then comes out here, we get into contact with the base of the brain.
If Marlowe received a stab wound just below the forehead and through the orbit, it's possible that one of the major blood vessels in his brain could have been severed, causing internal bleeding.
The brain is fairly tightly wrapped up in the membranes which surround it. So literally only 25, 50 mils of blood, the equivalent of a double shot of scotch, is going to be enough to cause the pressure on the brain to rise so quickly that he's going to die within a very short space of time. My feeling on Marlowe is if what they meant is that it went through the sort of eyebrow region but below the bony ridge, yes, it could well have happened. If the stab wound is up here, you've got to be looking for something else which has not been described and which should have been.
Dr. Kieran O'Keefe is head of criminal psychology at Buckinghamshire New University. He studies and assesses the causes that lead people to criminal behaviour, such as violence or murder.
Simply because you've got an activity, a social activity that takes place on a regular occasion where, with the alcohol fueling the environment too, you've got people who will need to show that they're more powerful than others. And if an argument develops over something as simple as a bill or a spilt drink, having gone through these stages of brutalisation and reflection, you would then decide, I'm not going to be the person to back down. And the only way that I can exert my power and aggression is by being completely violent to the person that's in front of me, because then everybody else will see that I'm not somebody to be messed with.
But for what reason had Marlowe come to Deptford?
Why Marlowe was meeting with these companions at the inn, it just seemed like a normal social occasion. I think that's extremely unlikely. Marlowe was under high pressure at that time. He was being investigated by the Privy Council. A warrant had been out for his arrest. Thomas Kidd, who had been his roommate, was under investigation and had been arrested. I think it's highly unlikely that he went out for a drink with the boys at that particular time. Something was definitely going on, and whatever was going on was hushed up.
There are a lot of inconsistencies. As soon as the inquest document was found, which was in 1925, a doctor said that it was impossible that Marlowe would have died instantly from the kind of wound that he was given. The other problem with the inquest document is that it rests on the testimony of 3 professional liars.
All 3 men had questionable backgrounds. Both Nicholas Skeers and Robert Pooley were employed by the government as secret agents, while Ingram Fraser had a reputation as a confidence trickster and was known to have swindled wealthy gentlemen out of money.
Robert Pooley was a consummate liar. He's down in the history books of that time. William Camden, the Tudor chronicler, called him a very expert dissembler. We even have a letter from Robert Pooley saying, I would swear and forswear myself rather than I would do myself any harm. He's essentially saying there that he would lie to the Lord Treasurer, Lord Burleigh, rather than get himself into trouble.
It seems plausible that Marlowe could have died in a brawl, but with many unanswered questions and the involvement of shadowy Elizabethan figures, it's easy to see how alternative theories might have arisen. Theories such as faking his own death. Dr. Ross Barber is an author and scholar who's researched the life and, more importantly, death of Christopher Marlowe. She believes that despite official accounts, there is evidence to suggest that Marlowe may not have actually died in Deptford.
It is possible that the answer to the Marlowe mystery is that he faked his death and went off to the continent. It isn't as ludicrous an idea as some people seem to think. Most people, if they know anything about Christopher Marlowe at all, they know that he was killed in a tavern brawl in Deptford. But Mrs. Bull's house wasn't a tavern. It was a government safe house, a stopping off point for agents going to and from the continent.
Despite what many people believe, Eleanor Bull was not an innkeeper, but a well-to-do widower with family connections in government and the royal court. With Marlowe facing possible execution for heresy, could she have somehow been involved in helping him fake his own death?
He had a really good reason to want to escape, and escape in such a way that people wouldn't go looking for him. No one goes looking for a dead man.
But if he did fake his death, how did he do it? Officially, Christopher Marlowe is buried in an unmarked grave in the churchyard of St Nicholas in Deptford. and for the coroner and jury to pronounce Marlowe dead at the scene, there would have to have been a body. So if Marlowe isn't buried in Deptford, who is?
If it's not Christopher Marlowe who's buried here, then it is the Welsh Protestant martyr John Penry, who was executed at St Thomas of Watering, just 3 miles to the west of here, suddenly, very quickly, without notice to his family, on the 29th of May.
John Penry was a Protestant preacher who was executed for treason the day before Marlowe's death. It's not known what happened to Penry's body, and it was never returned to his family. But what is known is that the body was under the care of the Queen's coroner, William Danby.
It was a very unusual time for a hanging. It was noted by Penry's biographers. He was taken away from his supper at 5 p.m. and hanged, and nobody knows where his body is.
Coroner William Danby was a close friend of Lord Burleigh, Queen Elizabeth's right-hand man. Coincidentally, Lord Burleigh was reported to have employed Marlowe on several occasions as a spy.
This is where Deptford meets the Thames, and it would have been an ideal place to take off for the continent. We don't actually know why the meeting was arranged here at Mrs. Bull's house. There's no particular reason why they would meet here to murder Marlowe or to have a fight with Marlowe, but it makes complete sense to meet here if he was going to take off, if the intention was to go get on a ship, go up the Thames and disappear somewhere in Scotland or in Europe.
Could Christopher Marlowe have faked his own death to evade prosecution? It's a fascinating story if true, but what evidence is there to support this claim?
Rather easier then than now to switch bodies if that had happened. But even then, I think it would have been pretty difficult to do, but certainly not beyond the wit of some people, no doubt. It might depend if some of the evidence, it might not apply to Marlowe's case, but there might be a situation where somebody had been dead for some time and putrefaction had occurred, or their physical appearance had altered. People were led to believe that it was X when it was Y, that kind of thing. These were unsophisticated times. They didn't have a modern mortuaries and anything of that sort. So yes, I mean, it was feasible, though I would have thought a little unlikely.
Could Marlowe have used the body of a recently executed man to trick people into believing he was dead?
There is an allegation that there was a substitution of the body of a recently hanged person. Obviously, the people who would have been able to properly identify Marlowe would be people who knew Marlowe. Possibly some members of the jury did, because the whole point of a jury originally was it was summoned from people who lived around about the place where the person died. But even if the jury were simply looking at a body and being asked, how did this fellow die? They would have noticed if it was the body of a hanged person, their face need not have been purple, but the tongue would almost certainly have been protruding. There would almost certainly have been a mark on the neck. And I'm sure that one of the 7 to 15 people there would have had sufficient nous to look at the neck and look at the body generally. So unless there's some degree of collusion, bribery, connivance to effect concealment, I don't think that's a starter. If there was a body there with a cut above the right eye, that was Marlowe, thank you very much.
I think the process of identifying a body in Marlowe's time would be very similar to the process today. Obviously, it would be on the part of those people who knew Marlowe, and they would be called forward to say that the body that they saw was the person that they knew. And of course, they could be asked about how well they knew him, if they only had a fleeting glimpse, or whether they were good friends or family or something of that sort. But evidentially, I would think the position is very much the same today.
Is it possible that the witnesses and jury who viewed the body were somehow influenced into supporting the conspiracy?
interesting point to say about kind of the staging of Christopher Marlowe's death, and whether a lie or deceit of that size will mean that people will believe it. At the time when this occurred, if there's any truth to that theory, there would have had to have been quite a few people involved in that for it to succeed, and undoubtedly there would have had to have been bribery. But ultimately all you'd need is a few witnesses to it, a few witnesses to say, I saw Christopher Marlowe in a fight in that particular inn, and he died, he was killed. And then it can just spiral. And then if you've got, in addition to that, official announcements by coroners, by the government, then it can only fuel that.
If Marlowe and his powerful connections in government had wanted to fake his death, they certainly had the means to make it happen. But with no concrete evidence to support this theory, we have to look at other possible explanations for his death. Some people believe that Marlowe did die in Deptford, but not in a drunken brawl. They believe he was assassinated. Tracy Borman is a historian and the joint chief curator of historic royal palaces. She believes that there may have been a more sinister reason behind Marlowe's death.
The death of Christopher Marlowe was one of the greatest unsolved mysteries. According to the official line, he was murdered in a pub brawl. An argument over the bill broke out. They'd been drinking all day and Marlowe was stabbed in the eye. He died instantly.
No, he insults me every week. You put this in front of me as if I would be able to deal with you.
But the real story was altogether darker than that. Marlowe was under suspicion of treason, of heresy. It's possible that he was a spy for Sir Francis Walsingham, and almost certainly the real story of Marlowe's death was more to do with assassination than murder.
But if Marlowe was assassinated, who ordered it and why?
Sir Walter Raleigh and Christopher Marlowe were great friends. They were both famous poets. They actually wrote poems to each other. And it's possible that Raleigh was somehow involved in the same treasonous activities for which Marlowe was being investigated at the time of his death. So it's said that Raleigh might have had him murdered because his own guilt would have come to light.
Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the most notable figures in Elizabethan England. He was a poet, explorer, and favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. But it was also said that he was an atheist.
Exactly what Sir Walter Raleigh was afraid that would come to light is not clear. It may have been that, like Marlowe, he shared his beliefs in heresy, that he was a blasphemer like Marlowe was believed to be, or even an atheist, and that was punishable by death in the Elizabethan period.
In 1592, Raleigh was accused of being the leader of a group known as the School of Atheism. It's said that amongst its members were noted scientists, scholars, and Christopher Marlowe. Could Marlowe have been killed on the orders of Sir Walter Raleigh, so his own heresy would not be exposed?
The situation which occurred in Marlowe's case, where there's a suspicion that witnesses were robbed out, it does strike a chord in modern times. We've only got to think of the Cray brothers and their activities in the 60s. people of that sort, there's always been a temptation to make away with witnesses who might cause you harm.
But without any evidence, how could it be proven that Raleigh was behind Marlowe's murder?
One of the ways of assessing these matters is to look and to use the old expression cui bono, to whom the benefit. Who is the person who is most likely to benefit from a crime of this sort? And in an investigation, that's usually the first port of call, to assess what had happened and to put somebody in the dock, if possible.
If Marlowe did have evidence that Sir Walter Raleigh was a heretic, then Raleigh would have had good cause to be worried when Marlowe was arrested. Under torture, Marlowe could have revealed secrets leading to his own arrest, but there is no solid evidence that Raleigh had any involvement in Marlowe's death. Should we accept the findings of the coroner's inquest that Marlowe was killed in self-defence? Could there be any truth to the story that he was assassinated on the orders of Sir Walter Raleigh? Or did he fake his own death to avoid trial and execution? Is it possible that the vague details recorded on the coroner's inquest have led people to misinterpret the location of the stab wound?
Could Christopher Marlowe have died with a single stab wound above his right eye? In short, the answer is yes. If the stab wound is immediately above the eye, it's going to go along the roof of the orbit over the eyeball. It's going to go through a bit of skull which is only 0.5 millimetre thick, 1 millimetre at the most, and requires minimal force to penetrate. Once it's through there, within a matter of 1/2 inch, 1.5 centimetres, it's in contact with a fairly large vessel or group of vessels under the base of the brain. Once these are cut, within seconds there's going to be enough blood around the brain, squashing it within its membranes to lead to almost immediate death.
Based on the given evidence, many experts see nothing wrong with the official account of Marlowe's death.
On the face of it, a defence of self-defence, given that daggers were involved and all the rest of it, might still be plausible. Of course, these days would be a matter of much closer investigation, and one would hope that the prosecuting authorities would not be under the same political pressure as the coroner was likely to have been at the time of Marlowe. There would be a much more thorough investigation. Of course, if darker consequences, darker possibilities emerged, that might make a big difference as to the conduct of the prosecution. But in the absence of that, simple rumour in itself wouldn't be enough. There's evidence of a brawl. A man was clearly killed in that brawl, and it was open to the person who'd inflicted the fatal wound to say, I did this in self-defence. I was afraid for my life.
And Marlowe's actions seem to be consistent with his personality.
Judging by what we know about Marlowe's character, that he was someone who could easily get involved in quarrels and a brawl, it seems to me perfectly possible that that's what happened on that occasion. Why he met with these companions is another story. He was at the time under investigation for atheism and possibly being suspected of interactions with Roman Catholics, which were not on government service. So it's quite possible that he was meeting them with something related to that kind of accusation, possibly to carry out government business. But I don't think some of the conspiracy theories that have been put forward hold water.
Christopher Marlowe lived in turbulent times, and evidence seems to strongly support the theory that he was involved in espionage activities. Marlowe was accused of atheism, and it would also be fair to assume that the reason for the meeting in Deptford was most likely something to do with the charges he was facing. But Marlowe also had a volatile and violent side that had led him into altercations before. So what evidence are we left with? It's a fascinating story, and if true, it would be one of history's greatest ever disappearing acts. But to pull it off, it would have taken the involvement of high-up government officials. And while Marlowe would have had the motive to fake his own death, experts agree that there is no solid evidence to prove this theory.
I think on the available evidence, as far as Marlowe is concerned, we can rule out a disappearance, some mysterious disappearance. The evidence seems pretty conclusive that he was killed that night. How or why he was killed, of course, is another matter.
Could Marlowe have been killed on the orders of Sir Walter Raleigh to stop him revealing that he too was an atheist? Even in modern times, it's not unheard of for witnesses to disappear or be killed. And there seems to be overwhelming proof that Marlowe did in fact die in Deptford.
I think the evidence for Marlowe's death is really very thin. The witnesses' accounts are suspect. On the other hand, we don't have anything else at all.
Although many scholars and experts have cast doubt on the testimony of Ingram Fraser, we do know that Marlowe could at times be aggressive and volatile. So for him to become involved in an argument that escalated into violence would not be out of character. It therefore seems that the official verdict stands, and he lost his life in a brawl that ended in tragedy. But over 400 years later, there are still many unanswered questions, some of which could only be answered by those present in Deptford on that fateful day. So what became of those people? In 1601, Nicholas Skeers was charged with treason for his part in a rebellion against Elizabeth I. He was found guilty and thrown into Bridewell Prison in London. Nothing more would ever be heard from him again. Robert Poley continued to serve in Her Majesty's Secret Service, frequently being used as a spy by Lord Burleigh. After 1602, there is no record of what happened to Poley. When and where he died remains a mystery. The coroner, William Danby, also had a mysterious fate. After filing the inquest report on Marlowe's death, the Queen's coroner seems to have simply disappeared. While Ingram Fraser, the man responsible for Marlowe's death, received a full royal pardon for his part in the killing, he eventually became a parish tax assessor and lived out his years in respectability until his death in 1627. And what of Christopher Marlowe? It was a life cut tragically short, but even in death, Marlowe would go on to influence the likes of William Shakespeare and generations of writers to follow. And to this day, he continues to be one of the most important poets and playwrights the world has ever seen.